Barnard's gate station was dying in honest red light when the ghost arrived. Hull alarms flickered like fever, bulkheads sighed, and the Zealith Dominion shaped its siege into a noose. On every coalition screen, the unknown contact was the same thin line of doubt. No transponder, no registry, just a needle of matte gray that slid between the station and the enemy flagship as if it had always belonged there. "Unidentified vessel," the Zealith warlord intoned. "Withdraw or be reduced." The human captain answered instead, "We don't withdraw from corridors of mercy." The station's director, Essari of the Saline, had stopped blinking. Amphibian eyes stayed wide when terror held the lids back. "Shields at 19%, announced the station AI in 3 languages. Refugee barges, tin cans with prayer flags, cowered behind the wreck of an ore tug. In the command well, Commander Jonah Hale, sole human assigned to Barnard's gate as a liaison and good luck charm, felt the deck hum change pitch. It sounded like an elevator cable fraying. It sounded like time snapping. On the tactical hologram, Zealith spearships formed a crescent, their lances charged with a cold, green luminescence that set teeth on edge. "We are out of time," Essari said. "We request parley." Jonah bit back the word surrender. He had spent the last month teaching evacuation drills, mapping which cargo holds could take extra berths, wiring children's sections with soft lighting so panic wouldn't stampede them. He'd promised himself not to make promises he couldn't keep. Then the line appeared, no signature, no burn plume. A vessel slim as a sketched idea cut across the battle space and parked between the crescent and the station. It didn't decloak. The air around it just decided to remember it existed. The Zealith opened fire reflexively. Beams converged. Space rippled. The unknown ship's hull glowed with a quiet blue like starlight through ice, and the beams bent away as if embarrassed, slurring past into harmlessness. "Gravity lensing," Jonah whispered, "at ship scale." A human voice came across every band, clean and unrushed. "Barnard's gate, this is Captain Maya Rios of the UNS Paladin. We're cutting a corridor. Divert power to civilian docking rings and patch us into your shield bus." Jonah tried not to cheer into his mic. Essari's throat sac fluttered. "Human, the warlord has declared no quarter for medevac craft." "He declared that," Rios said, "but the laws of physics still respect proportionality." Jonah could almost hear the smile. "We're going to make him respect it too." The Paladin moved. It didn't accelerate so much as redraw lines. Zealith fighters poured out to intercept, sleek knives with bone-white spines. A dome of cobalt unfolded from Paladin's skin like a breath. When the fighters punched through it, their engines hiccuped off in perfect unison. They drifted. Lights still on, pilots gesturing inside helmets, alive and suddenly very aware of inertia. "Non-lethal," Jonah said. "They are disabling, not killing." Essari looked at him sideways. "Humans have rules." "We try," Jonah said, "on good days." Rios' second transmission wasn't swagger, it was logistics. "Hale, copy me your station's power harmonics. Dr. Harlan is bringing a coupling. Think of it as a translator between your field rhythm and ours." Jonah relayed. "You can dock under fire?" "We've docked under lawsuits," Rios said. "Fire is easier." The Paladin slid toward Dock 6 on a vector a sane person wouldn't choose. Zealith lances raked its path. Every shot curved aside, warped just enough to miss, and stitched neat lines into empty space. A history professor once told Jonah that at Dunkirk, destroyer captains shaved paint off their hulls to make room for one more boat to pass. He thought of that as the Paladin shaved millimeters off Dock 6's rim, kissed the mag clamps, and pushed a soft blue thread of energy into the station's shield spine. Readouts changed. The AI sounded faintly surprised. Shield coherency improving, 41%, 53. The crescent tightened, insulted that their prey had teeth again. On the main screen, the Zealith warlord's crest swelled. "Human vessel, you claim mercy and hide behind tricks. Withdraw, or your corridor becomes a grave." Rios answered with coordinates, not rhetoric. Coalition pilots saw them light up on their HUDs. dashed lines through the melee area as chalk marks, showing where not to shoot because refugees would be there in 60 seconds. "This is a corridor," Rio said. "Shoot at it and history will attach your name to it. Choose carefully." The first barge committed, engines whining. Zealith gunners hesitated, of all things. It was the hesitation that broke the rhythm of the siege. Jonah felt hope ignite the way a fusible link burns, fast and bright, irreversible. "Commander," Essari said softly, "tell the children to sing." He didn't ask why. He patched the music feed to Dock 3. Small voices rapped the hiss of air and metal. Paladin's grapnels, thin cables tipped with shimmering beads, shot out and stitched themselves to the barge's spine. The beads pulsed in a sequence Jonah couldn't parse. The barge felt lighter, like a backpack someone else had lifted without asking. It slid through the corridor with the improbable grace of a door finally finding its hinge. Zealith reorienting, the AI warned, "They are targeting Dock 6. Jonah looked at the status board. Dr. Harlan was still in the coupling trunk, half inside the machine that was holding the station's skin together. "Captain," Jonah said, "they'll shoot the dock to get you." Rios' breath was a steady metronome over comms. "We're not leaving," she said. "That's the trick." Another storm of green spooled up on the Zealith flagship. In Jonah's ear, the children's song reached a note that wavered and then held. The warlord's lance focused. The station braced. Paladin rotated a fractional degree, nothing a human eye would call significant, and every gun in the crescent fired anyway. The beams converged on Dock 6 like a verdict. The verdict unraveled. Light twisted not in a tidy mirror arc, but in a helix. Each lance thread pulled a few microns off true by a lattice that had not existed a heartbeat before. Paladin had thrown a mesh of micrograv projectors into vacuum, then tuned them like a choir. The lances braided themselves into a harmless rope and slid over the dock like rain over oilcloth. Dock 6 trembled but did not break. Harlan laughed once into the engineering channel, the cracked laugh of a person who had just finished threading a needle while the house burned. "Barnard's gate," Rio said. "We're about to flood your field with a staccato pattern. It'll feel buzzy. Don't fight it." The shield spectrum readout looked like a jazz chart, notes where none should be, syncopations dancing between Zealith pulses. Jonah remembered a lecture on the Navajo code talkers, how the language itself became the encryption, how pattern resisted pattern. The Zealith lances, tuned for smooth prey, skittered off the buzz like skates catching gravel. Essari's counselors crowded the pit. "Who are you to carry such force in empty registry? We're the ones who didn't want to be first to shoot in your wars," Jonah said, then regretted the edge in his tone. Rios took the question without defensiveness. "United Nations, ship Paladin, Phantom-class courier. We hid so we could witness, and we witnessed too much." She didn't add apology. She didn't have time. A Zealith transmission cut across channels, the warlord's voice modulated to ceremonial disdain. "Human captain, your corridor shows weakness. Mercy teaches our young to aim low. We have archived your species' signatures. We have samples." The bridge of Paladin went quiet enough that Jonah heard his own pulse. Harlan's breathing sharpened. "They were at Clytemnestra forward," she said, not a question. Rios' jaw flexed. "Copy." Jonah's stomach dipped. Clytemnestra was a listening post in name, a family in practice. He'd done a rotation there. He knew the cook's jokes and the way the station dog chased zero-G dust motes like fireflies. The Zealith were not supposed to know where it was. They knew. "We will grow your steadiness inside our marrow," the warlord promised. "Withdraw and live as our lesson." Essari whispered, "If they have your people, we don't bomb our way to graves," Rio said. She cut her mic and looked left. "Zeke, light the beacon." The Paladin's comms officer, Ezekiel Ford, tapped a pad. A signal went out not to any one ship, but to an old lattice, beacons laced into treaties so old even the Zealith elders signed them before they learned to sneer at them. The Mercy Corridor Protocol. It demanded a ceasefire window for evacuation lanes. The protocol had been a joke for a decade. The joke glowed now above Barnard's gate like a stain on conscience. The warlord laughed dry and low. Your paper suns don't warm us. Some of his captains paused. Jonah could see it, the slowdown in their targeting solutions. Somewhere on those bone-spined ships, an officer was remembering a grandparent's story about honor before it became a costume. Refugee barge 2 through, the AI reported. 3 is boarding. Harlan clamped the coupling home. Power surged through Paladin and into the station's field spine, then out again into the honeycombed corridors Rios had drawn. Jonah, Rios said, "Oh, we're going to seed you a playbook. It's plain language, use what you can." A packet jumped the link. Schematics annotated in tidy handwriting, recipes for turning scavenged coils into field phase shifters, notes about fail points with little skulls drawn beside them. Dr. Harlan's humor bled through like a stitched signature. "Do not get vaporized, please." "Oh," Zeke said, "that's new." The Zealith flagship's forward fins bloomed open, revealing a barrel like a cathedral nave. Energy bled into it from the crescent, colors smearing across the spectrum. Harlan swore. "Cascade Lance, they're going to pour every gun into one mouth and spit it at the dock." Jonah saw the geometry, a hammer whose handle was a fleet. Rios didn't tell anyone to brace. She said, "We're going to bow." Paladin dipped, not away from the barrel, but toward it, giving the lance a shallower angle. Grav nodes rippled on her skin like goosebumps in steel. The cascade lanced out, a slab of annihilation that turned stars thin. When it hit Paladin's lens, it slid sideways and sheared along the dock's curvature, hissing, dispersing in a long aurora that painted a scrap metal paradise above Dock 6. The dock lived again by millimeters. "Harlan," Rios said, "status?" "Hot but charming," Harlan answered. "Like a violin played by a volcano." The warlord hissed, frustrated into inventiveness. Smaller Zealith craft launched a web of flares that pretended to be wounded lifeboats, their transponders crying for help in stolen voices. "Decoys," the AI warned. "They mimic coalition distress codes." Jonah felt the old anger spike, the one about liars who spend their creativity on traps. "Tag them as hostile mimicry," he said. "Reroute volunteer tugs to visual confirm before approach." A Saline pilot chimed acknowledgement, voice steady. The found family of the gate, people who had learned to love each other while fixing pipes, would not be snared today. "We can hold this for 5 minutes," Harlan said. "Maybe 8 if nobody sneezes." "We need 12, Rios answered. "We're not just evacuating, we're changing the math." She tapped controls that didn't exist to eyes, and Paladin's hull released a cluster of seeds, dull spheres that unfolded into lattices shining with gentle light. They drifted to pre-marked points around the station and began to hum. "Local gravity wells," Jonah said. "No," Harlan corrected, pride and terror braided. "Local ethics. You can't put a minefield around kids and call it defense. You put cushions and call it what it is." The cushions sank in. Zealith shots that might have grazed the corridor spilled into them like water into sponges and re-emerged as harmless heat. The warlord had one card left that fit his doctrine. He played it. "Borders inbound," the AI snapped. "They're targeting Dock 6 to take the coupling." Jonah ran before he knew he'd moved, boots hammering toward the access ladder. Essari called after him, something both blessing and reprimand. At the mouth of the ladder, Jonah pulled his sidearm and thought of Midway, of timing, of knowing when the other guy thought he had time. He did not think about fear because he didn't have time to maintain it. The hatch below him blew inward. Zealith shock troops poured through, masks grinning. Jonah leveled, breathed out, and met them. Zealith armor looked like knuckly bones lacquered in tar. Their rifles had the clean indecency of tools designed by a committee that never had to use them. Jonah didn't plan to be a hero. He planned to be annoying. He aimed for joints. He threw his whole body weight into the hatch control and slammed the emergency bulkhead halfway down, pinning the second trooper's weapon against the deck. The first trooper recovered fast, too fast. Jonah fired twice, center mass out of habit, and cursed as the rounds spattered off ceramic. He went low, stole the trooper's footing with a boot hook learned from a Saline stevedore, and introduced a knee to a throat plate seam. The trooper made a sound like a promise breaking and crumpled. On your left, Harlan said in his ear, too calm, too helpful, as if commenting on a chess stream. Her voice made Jonah grin despite himself. He rolled right anyway. Left was where the shock baton cracked, leaving ozone and regret in the narrow air. Saline dockhands surged behind him with pipe wrenches and welding lances, found family arriving late and exactly on time. The bulkhead came down with a slow, grinding finality, cutting off the boarding party like an unfinished sentence. Coupling intact, Harlan reported. Dock 6 holds. She sounded like someone who had just persuaded a dragon to nap. Jonah wanted to sit down and let the shakes come. He didn't. Captain, he said, we have 5 minutes of grace and a hallway full of scorched bravado. Use it, Rios replied. We're going to change Zealith doctrine by example. On the main plot, Zealith spearships reoriented. The warlord had taken notes. Smaller craft began to shepherd civilians, Zealith civilians, the ones he used as human shields in debates, into the corridor, hoping Paladin's ethics would jam its guns. Rios obliged him by not shooting, but she also tagged every shepherd craft with a ribbon of light, a tether line thin as thought that ran back to a coil on Paladin's belly. If they fire while tethered, Zeke murmured, we'll yank. Politely, Rios said, if possible. Harlan pushed a fresh packet to the station, a triage of principles, schema for target selection under proportionality. Jonah watched Essari read it aloud, voice steady. The plan wasn't permissive, it was precise. Zealith gunners noticed. Their fire stuttered, then resumed. Uncertainties slipperier than fear. Philosophy isn't a shield, Jonah's academy instructor had said, but it can teach you which way to hold one. He thought of just war theory written not to justify war, but to chain it. He thought of civil rights organizers building logistics networks under surveillance, turning marches into supply lines of dignity. He thought, dumbly, that history class had not been a waste. The Paladin pivoted to offense without changing its face. Kinetic darts, mere metal, spooled from hidden bays and whispered into acceleration rails. Grav lenses kissed them forward until simple things became very fast. They struck Zealith shield nodes at angles Rios had mapped from hundreds of hours of watching them hunt. Nodes failed. Lances dimmed. Paladin never, not once, put a dart through a cabin. Jonah let out a breath he hadn't known he was turning blue for holding. The warlord's answer was desperate science. A cluster of Zealith destroyers lit up with blooms of violet, fields buckling inwards, heat bleeding away as if the ships were becoming colder lanterns. Imploders, Harlan said, voice flat. They've stolen outlines of our math and drawn monsters in the margins. If they go off uncontrolled inside your cushion net, we'll have a crater where your childhood memories used to be. Then we pull them, Rios said. Zeke, open with them. Zeke threw channel wide to the destroyer captains in perfect Zealith. Your engineer lied to you. The containment shells are insufficient at that harmonics. If you light them here, you will write your names in your children's ash. It wasn't mercy. It was truth as leverage. One destroyer cut power immediately. 2 wavered. The 4th jacked its output higher out of spite. Rios didn't argue with zeal. Paladin fired 3 darts, not at the destroyer, but at the gravitational clamps holding it stable against its own folly. The clamps shattered. The ship spun, and when the imploder field hiccuped, its bloom vented at harmless angles into empty dark. The warlord howled, power shifting hand by hand as captains recalculated in real time whether dying for a speech was a good career move. Arty telemetry, Essari's weapons chief piped in. If we had your targeting, we could rake the spearships off our corridor. Harlan grinned into the shared link. Borrow it. She dragged an overlay into their system. Sight lines, lead times, every ugly little guess workshopped into math the coalition could own. Saline gunners stitched neat lines into Zealith flankers. Not kills, cuts, the crescent bled shape. Signal, Zeke said suddenly, gaze unfocusing. Sideband low phase like someone coughing in the walls. He isolated it. The voice was human and strained. Clytemnestra forward to any UN channel. They've made us rewrite their code. We salted the designs with bad ratios. If they copy them raw, the imploders will eat their own field coils. We are alive. For now. Harlan exhaled a laugh that turned into a sob she didn't let become a sob. Those smug monsters, they booby-trapped their theft with ethics. Rios closed her eyes one heartbeat. Copy, Clytemnestra, hold, we're coming. Her voice didn't rise on the promise, it settled like a hand on a shoulder. Multiple new contacts, the AI interrupted. Dominion reinforcements on Vector Sunward, mass larger than anything catalogued. Jonah's brief universe shrank to the command well. He could feel Essari's hand find his forearm, cool, steady. We have saved many, Essari said. We may not save ourselves. Rios didn't look at the incoming heavies. She looked at the corridor, now bright with fleeing ships. We save the idea, she said. We do not give them a world with one less corridor of mercy. Harlan's boards flashed red gold. Captain, she said, I can hold this buzz for 90 seconds, then I need to vent the coupling or it melts into one very expensive bead. Vent on my mark, Rios said. The new contacts resolved. A Dominion behemoth with a spine like a broken mountain, flanked by carrier pylons. Its main array rotated toward the station with astronomical malice. Jonah remembered the professor again. Midway turned on minutes, not miracles. He looked at the clock. He felt history yaw right. Behemoth's maw opened. There wasn't time to be perfect. There was time to be specific. Rios dragged the paladin inside the behemoth's firing solution, drawing its attention like a matador who didn't believe in capes. Zeke, she said, seed their array with a lie. A big lie? Something plausible. Zeke pulsed a microburst. A map with the station's shield resonance shifted just enough to whisper, shoot here. The behemoth's targeting lattice twitched toward the fake weakness. Coalition, Harlan said into the shared net. On my mark, everyone breathe out. We do not, Essari began, then realized what Harlan meant. Their shield controllers exhaled a little power, just enough. The behemoth corrected again, too fast for pride to catch up. Rios rolled Paladin across its face, dropping glitter, flechettes that weren't weapons so much as grit in the hinge. The behemoth fired. The shot went long by a stubborn percentage, drilling empty light and turning a constellation into a smear. Barnard's gate shook anyway from the wake. Vent, Rios ordered. Harlan popped the coupling. Steam hissed into vacuum as braided energy unwound like a last note. The cushions dimmed but held shape. Zealith spearships dove for the gap. Coalition gunners, now aiming with human math and their own fury, stitched them aside. Refugee traffic clear of corridor by 80%, the AI said. Jonah let his knees want to buckle. He didn't let them. Paladin, the warlord said, almost conversational now. You are a small knife making large cuts. We have learned the shape of you. Observe. The behemoth spewed pods, hundreds like seeds from a rancid fruit. Each pod carried a micro-imploder with a failed deadly circuit. Harlan hissed air through her teeth. They're going to salt the corridor with suicides. We can't shoot them all, Zeke said. We don't have the hands. Rios did not reach for bigger guns. She reached for older words. Dominion fleet, she broadcast, open and multilingual. We have your civilians aboard these last 2 barges. They are tagged. Any pod that detonates inside this corridor writes its blast across your children's names. This channel is recorded to 10 neutral archives. The pods wobbled through math and through shame. Not enough stopped. Just enough did to make the rest tactically unsound. The warlord clicked his mandibles in disgust, which sounded like hail on grave markers. Jonah, Harlan said, I need you to throw breakers in section blue and pretend you mean it. That will black out the promenade. Yes, Harlan said. It will also let me steal the surge for 30 seconds. Jonah ran. He plunged his hands into a box designed by a species with too many safety rules to be convenient and yanked. The promenade went dark. The children's song didn't. It got quieter, like a promise being told closer. Paladin fattened on stolen surge. She extended her lens not as a shield, but as a hand. Gravity does not care about our metaphors, but engineers do. And Harlan's math made the metaphor obey. The lens caught the first wave of pods and refocused them into a tidy arc that marched past the corridor like a storm diverted by a valley wall. A few pods kissed the edges, flared, died out like sulking fireflies in rain. "Borders again," the AI warned. "Opposite side, dock 2. Jonah skidded, reversed, sprinted toward the older, uglier dock that never got lighting budget. He didn't have a plan beyond be there. When he snapped the hatch wheel, he found not Zealith but a man in a grease-stained jacket, human, eyes huge. "We brought them." The man gasped and jerked a thumb over his shoulder. Behind him, 2 Zealith juveniles, spines soft, eyes glassy with the peculiar bravery of kids, clutched each other and whispered through translator collars. "Why would you?" Jonah began. The man shrugged, near tears and defiant. "Because they were on the wrong ship at the wrong time, and that's not a sin." Jonah swallowed a boulder of feeling. "Get them to the clinic," he said, and pushed the hatch shut against a universe that would happily claw it back open. On the plot, the behemoth banked for a second pass. The first pods it had thrown were now drifting hazards at weird vectors like caltrops in gravity's carpet. "They're making the sky tiring," Harlan said. "Captain, we cannot dance forever." "We don't have to," Rio said. "We just have to change the song." Zeke grinned, catching up with her tone. "Broadcast? Broadcast." They pushed a pattern across the bands, not speech, not even music, but rhythm. Pulse, pause, pulse. It was the heartbeat of the corridor encoded into the kind of signal even sullen machines respected. Coalition ships synced without being told. Their fire walked the rhythm and created windows where there had been only high-velocity argument. The behemoth misread the timing and arrived half a beat late, like a bully running into a door that had already closed. 75 seconds, Harlan said. "Then our lens goes from polite to petulant." "That's enough," Rio said, and cut power to weapons entirely. Jonah's head snapped up. "Captain, they are not the point," Rio said. "The point is the corridor. The point is that it exists after we don't." She angled Paladin between the behemoth and the last barge and opened every channel. "United Nations, ship Paladin to any vessel who can hear me. Mark this. The rule is simple. When someone draws a corridor of mercy, you do not fire at it. Not because we can stop you, because you don't do that." The barge slid past. The behemoths more gathered black light and held it like a bad breath. Zeke stared at his board, then up at space. "Cap," he said very quietly, as if speaking too loud might change the reading. "New contacts, mass signatures, human, big, 12+, they're gating in sunward." Rio's didn't smile. Her shoulders dropped half an inch, the weight adjusting. "About time," Harlan said, and let herself sound tired. The behemoth fired anyway, stubborn to the end. The shot did not land. "Parts 5-8 to follow. Reply TI letter 1E BFP T letter 1E 5C, or continue when you're ready." Image prompt. Bright, cinematic space scene of a slender, matte gray human ghost ship. UNS Paladin projecting cobalt blue gravity lenses to curve emerald energy lances away from a battered, modular space station labeled Barnard's Gate. Refugee barges thread through a glowing mercy corridor marked by dotted light. In the distance, a colossal bone-spined enemy behemoth opens a cathedral-like cannon. Style. Sharp, high contrast, bold shapes, vivid blues, reds, purples, yellows, whites. Clean composition, no text or borders. The shot missed because space changed its mind. 12 human capital ships phased in, not as flashes but as consequences. Atlas-class carriers, 2 narrow-hipped railgun cruisers, and a wedge-shaped command ship that ate sensor glare. They didn't decloak. They refused to be anywhere else. Their arrival stacked the local metric like folded paper, just enough that the behemoth's aim, already lured wide, sprayed its fury into a patch of dark that would not testify. "Task Force Meridian," Zeke breathed. "Admiral O'Neill on the flag." Her voice arrived like steel wrapped in wool. "Barnard's Gate, Paladin, we have your corridor marked. We will not fire through it." In every coalition ear, that simple sentence was a cathedral. The coalition net crackled with relief, then discipline. Essari made a saline sign for witness and replied with coordinates and gratitude pared down to mission weight. The behemoth adjusted. Bullies learn fast when they must. Pods and spearships shifted to harry flanks the human heavies couldn't cover without scuffing the corridor. O'Neill didn't flinch toward spectacle. "Our job is geometry," she said, and Meridian built rooms in space. Containment planes that looked like faint rainstorms, rails that offered temptations ruinous to Zealith keels. The carriers vomited little, which is to say they launched nothing that would choose its own targets. Their strike craft fell outward like buttons from a patient coat, took up escort stations along the dotted Mercy line, and showed their bellies to prove their guns were cold. "UNS Vanguard to Paladin," a new voice crackled. "We paint a path to your thieves." Clytemnestra forward flickered on Harlan's secondary display, tucked into a Zealith auxiliary grid downstream of the behemoth. "They hid my home in their shadow," Harlan said. "They always were sloppy decorators. There wasn't enough Paladin to be everywhere. There never is. Rios carved the problem the way a medic triages a street. Who dies if we don't touch them? Who lives if we do?" "Admiral," Rios said, "request permission to raid their lab complex. We'll need a wedge through the behemoth's flank." O'Neill's answer was the grim grace of old trust. "Granted. Meridian will hold their eyes. Your rules of engagement govern the wedge." That last line was a gift and a dare. Keep Mercy's math even when everyone else swings for the fences. Paladin slid under the behemoth's keel, hugging shadow where shadow meant less math. Zeke sprayed decoys like chaff prayers. Harlan tuned the lens so low it hummed in Jonah's teeth, a sympathetic buzz that felt like standing next to a choir warming its vowels. Boarders tried again at Dock 2 and found the hatch welded from the Coalition side. In 6 species, weld styles overlapped into one ugly, beautiful seam. A Saline child's drawing fluttered in recycled breeze, a blue line between 2 stick stations, a no-guns sign in radiant crayon. "They're pivoting to disgrace," Essari said quietly. On the plot, Zealith spearships began to mask themselves in refugee signatures, hoping to draft behind compassion. Meridian answered with law, not lasers. They fenced the imposters out with a geodesic it would take careful violence to puncture. Philosophy isn't a shield, Jonah had been taught, but here came a shield that happened to be a philosophy. He made a note to send his old professor a bottle if there were still bottles later. Visual on Clytemnestra grid, Harlan reported the lab was not a cathedral of wickedness. It was beige. Beige walls, beige conduits, beige cruelty. Human life signs winked in a cluster like pearls in a drain. Zealith guards shifted, bored. Paladin didn't have battering rams. It had patience and people. Rios opened a channel to a Coalition Ranger team staging in a vacuum bus with 1 engine and too many stories. "Ranger Kaido," she said, "we're your ghost. We'll give you 60 seconds of polite invisibility." "Copy, Paladin," Kaido replied, voice rope-burned and cheerful. "Invisible is my best angle." Harlan spooled a local lull in grav gradient so cameras thought the room was thinking of elsewhere. The bus kissed the lab's belly, cut a hole as discreet as a cough, and sent in 6 shadows that moved like inevitability. "Interrogators on the far wall," Zeke murmured, tracking the Zealith biometrics. "Clytemnestra survivors center left." Jonah watched on thermal, heat blotches, heartbeats, the quick flare of a baton that thought it was important. The Rangers wrote lines with tranquilizers and cable ties. 1 Zealith bolted for a panel marked with a childish pictograph, 2 wavy lines meeting. Jonah read the intent before he knew he could. "Imploder safeties," he said. "Harlan." "On it," she snapped, and sent a kiss of opposite charge through the line so the switch broke itself in a harmless pout. Rangers began hustling humans through the hole in the world. A woman with a buzz cut and the steady hands of someone who had taught undergrads to solder gave a thumbs up to the invisible air. "Clytemnestra crew secure," Kaido reported. +6 non-humans the Zealith didn't bother to list in their paperwork. "Of course they didn't," Jonah said, surprising himself with how tired the anger in it sounded. The behemoth was not waiting. It rolled, ugly graceful for its mass, and lined up a second cascade not at the dock but at the line of cushions, intending to obliterate the very idea of the corridor. Meridian's carriers moved, too slow to catch with guns, just fast enough with their bodies. They shouldered angled, became slanted walls. The cascade scraped along their tuned skins, painting heat in colors cameras invented for lack of names. Armor blistered. Crew prayed. No ships died, but several learned new verbs for strain. "We're at our heat budget," O'Neill said, voice unvarnished. "We can give you 40 seconds more of stupidity, then we must step back or become furniture." Rios looked at the evac timer, 23 seconds to clear the last barge, plus 10 to let the stragglers with small important parcels, wedding photos, a brass pan, a pet terrarium, past the imaginary line that separated rescue from regret. "We can earn 30, she said. "Zeke, open us to the warlord." He came on screen with the calmness of a man who had convinced half a galaxy that anger is a form of civilization. "Human knife," he said, almost affectionate now. "You have cut your corridor. Learn that we, too, can be surgeons." Rios didn't give him space to stand taller. "You have children aboard our last barge," she said. "Their collars broadcast in your own alphabet. If you fire at your names." She watched his pupils. Pride fought arithmetic. Arithmetic won by a cruel hair. 30 seconds, Harlan whispered. "Make a church out of them." Paladin pushed off Dock 6 like a skater and slid broadside between the behemoth and the last dots. The lens unfolded not as a dome but as a harp, taut lines strung in the angles Harlan loved. The behemoth fired because bullies do even when math protests. The beam hit the harp and sang. It sang itself thinner. It sang itself past the line where it meant anything. The last barge crossed the dotted light and in a private miracle did not bump another hull. "Evac complete," the AI said, astonished by its own words. "Then we go from mercy to audit," O'Neill said. "Paladin, on my mark, we introduce the behemoth to accountability." Rios lifted her chin, breathed out. "We will not kill their bridge," she said softly to herself or to history. "We will cut their hands." "Mark," O'Neill said. Paladin turned her darts outward. The plan wasn't glorious. It was paperwork with kinetics. Harlan had built an atlas of the behemoth's compliance nodes. Those clever little boxes buried in armor that let commands arrive at guns without telling the guns who wrote them. Paladin's darts flicked along that nervous system the way wire cutters skip-snip a protest banner free. Every cut was a question in a different grammar. Do you obey orders that make a liar of your oath? Do you accept heat with no target but fear? Meridian sculpted pressure without glee, her heavies pinning escorts so they could not interpose without choosing to break the corridor rule now etched into the fight. Coalition crews who had spent years making do now made history, their gunnery tight as stitching. Sari's people painted Zealith radiators with coolant darts engineered from fishing tools, the simple fishing of a marsh culture scaled to unpleasant effect. "It is remarkable," Sari murmured amid the measured chaos, "how often kindness and competence can be mistaken for sorcery." "Imploder harmonics shifting," Zeke warned. "They are retuning around our cushions." Harlan's mouth flattened. "They are learning, good for them, terrible for us." The lab bus blew free with Clytemnestra survivors clinging to harness lines, faces pinched from the fatigue of having hope surprise them. "We're home," Kaido said, voice unexpectedly small. Jonah closed his eyes for a breath, then opened them on a world that still required hands. "Captain," O'Neill cut in. "They're charging a fail-deadly array. If their bridge loses authority, the behemoth vents its cargo bays straight into the corridor. We can intercept 80%. The 20 will be not numbers." There it was, the dilemma Stoic books talk about with tidy margins and coffee stains. Rios looked at the corridor. It was thinner now, patched and scorched, but it existed. "We cut the wire at the source," she said. "Boarding option?" "Negative," O'Neill replied. "Their interior is a maze built by someone who liked rats too much." Jonah found his mouth speaking before Rank caught up. "I can thread the maintenance tract," he said. Dock 2's old capillaries line up with their bay intakes. We mapped similar tract work at Outpost 12. The bends will hurt, but I can crawl it with a suitcase. The suitcase? Harlan asked. Jonah swallowed. An ethics bomb. He explained in hushed syllables. The Clytemnestra team had salted their stolen math with parity checks that looked like random noise. Package that noise in a device, marry it to the Behemoth's command lattice, and you could force the ship to apply its own rules to its fail-deadly plan. It wouldn't blow. It would unwrite. That required a human inside because the Zealoth had taught their systems to ignore perfect machine logic in favor of ugly human insistence. They had not expected that insistence from a human who wanted doors to stay open. Rios didn't lecture him about heroism. She looked at the clock, the tracked map, the barge trajectories, the way Essari's fingers trembled just at the webbing. "Take Harlan," she said. Not because you can't do it, but because she knows how to coax ugly code to admit it is ugly. You are not allowed to die stylishly. Ugly living is the job. "Copy that," Jonah said, heart hammering like a tool without a brand name. Harlan grabbed the suitcase, a lunchbox full of conscience wrapped in blue tape and snapped on a harness. "If I say duck," she told Jonah as they sprinted, "consider that a metaphor with your whole body." The maintenance tract introduced itself with disinterest. It stank of old oil and new terror. Jonah shoved himself into the square darkness and counted his breaths, because counting was the cheapest lullaby. Harlan pushed the case ahead, grunting at corners that had opinions about ribs. "You know," she said, voice conversational because that was the tone that rescued people break glass for when panic fogs the room. "Athens argued about whether good people become good by nature or habit. I make a habit of not letting fascists weaponize my field equations." "Good habit," Jonah said around metal taste. They reached the juncture where station capillary kissed behemoth intake. The gasket hissed with pressure differences and politics. Harlan popped clips, slid her slender form through a seam that looked allergic to humans, and tapped a rhythm on the case that matched the heartbeat broadcast. "Sometimes," she murmured, "being human means you can talk to a ship that thinks dialect." She slotted the ethics bomb into a socket that wasn't a socket until she declared it one. The case clicked. The tract hummed. The behemoth's interior said a bad word in a language of fans. "Package engaged," Harlan said. "Walk me through the last line." Jonah, who had no business being the voice of last lines, heard himself recite. "You are bound by your own safety matrices to minimize harm to non-combatants under your own doctrine, Section 9. Reconcile contradictions. Execute lowest harm path." Harlan pushed the enter key with a thumb that had solder burns older than the war. Behemoth shuddered. On the plot, 1,000 pod doors blinked amber, then closed sheepishly. The fail-deadly lattice unraveled like a lie meeting cross-examination. The warlord's crest flared with a color Jonah had not seen on Zealoth faces: embarrassment. "Good work," O'Neill said. "She didn't add boys and girls. She also didn't say we're done. Now he will try to ram the corridor and call it victory." The behemoth angled accordingly, bringing its wounded pride to bear. Meridian heavies pivoted to block and found math thin. They had eaten too much heat. The corridor would be crushed between duty and mass. "Options?" Rios asked, not rhetorically. Zeke's voice was soft. "We can move the corridor." "Barnard's gate," Rios called into the net. "We're going to slide your mercy lane 30 meters starboard. All ships inside trust the dotted lights when they move." Essari didn't ask how. Found families learn fast. Harlan, still in the tract, tuned the harp's strings with the tip of her glove. The dotted line shifted like a lane marker on a friendly night road. Tugs, barges, escorts, everyone leaned with the turn as if dancing in middle school and finding, to their surprise, that it felt like flying. The behemoth roared past the place where the corridor had been and discovered empty history waiting to trip it. Meridian's railgun cruisers fired at last, not at crew spaces, but at the behemoth's keel where plates met with sloppy arrogance. Bolts of compressed humility drove in and pinned the giant to its own shame. It did not die, it knelt. "Boarding party to their bridge?" O'Neill asked. Rios looked at the feed from Dock 2, the human mechanic hustling Zealith juveniles down a hall lit by glow sticks. "We take him alive," she said. "He needs to hear the rules before he sees the cell." "Then by all means," O'Neill said dryly, "let's invite him to civics class." The paladin angled for the warlord's balcony. Zealith bridges follow the same terrible interior designer. Altars for command, pits for the commanded, trophies hung with enough ceremony to make theft look like heritage. The warlord stood at the prow, hands behind his back in the way of men who have rehearsed dignity more than compassion. When Paladin opened with a light cone and a handshake, no breach, simply an insistence that 2 rooms be neighbors, the warlord turned as if to greet guests. "Do I kneel?" he asked conversationally. "Is that how your stories end?" Rio stepped through the cone with Sari at her shoulder and 2 rangers who moved like punctuation. "Some stories end with trials," she said, "and long footnotes." She did not show her weapon, though one slept at her hip and respected her enough not to rattle. "You've killed fewer than you could," the warlord observed, peering past them to the corridor, now a bruised ribbon in the dark. "You think that makes you kind. It makes you slow." "It makes us careful," Sari said, voice like rain interposing between fire and field. "Care is a speed you have forgotten." The warlord tilted his head, amused as if by a cat quoting law. "You salted our theft," he said to Rios. "Your people, clever, dishonorable." Harlan, wiping tracked grime from her cheek with the dignity of a mechanic in a gala hall, smirked. "We constrained your weapons to your own doctrine. Imagine that, being held to what you said." Jonah thought of stoic lines about being a citadel for yourself. He also thought of how many times in human history they had failed to be. The admission tasted like honesty. Rios didn't let the warlord choose the frame. "This is how this will go," she said. "We will remove your ship from this fight. You will face a court that includes your own clergy, because law without a chorus is a slogan. You will watch footage of the corridor from 20 angles. Then we will speak about bargains, not territory, but behavior." He bared the fossil smile of someone who hears charity and files it under weakness. "What if I detonate?" he asked lightly. "What if my last order is a lesson your grandchildren read in whispers?" "Your failed deadly circuit now requires 2 moral keys," Harlan said. "We hold one, you hold the other. If we turn ours, it locks. If you turn yours, it weeps." The warlord's jaw flexed. He had not expected to be out-ritualed. "You learned our liturgy," he said. "We read everyone's hymnals," Rios answered. "It's a hobby." Zeke's voice fluttered in Rios's ear. "Maya," he said softly, the first name shy as a rook. "Their fleet is fracturing. Half their captains are broadcasting queries about corridor rules to their hinterlands. The ones with grandmothers are winning the arguments." Rios kept her face neutral. "Good," she said, as if discussing sandpaper. "We prefer debates to funerals." Meridian called in, status change. Dominion fast movers inbound from the sun's blind side, likely zealots with fewer grandmothers. O'Neill's tone made room for dark humor. "We can hold, but nibbling begins to resemble biting." Jonah glanced at the promenade cam. The children's choir had faded. Now it was a Saline auntie telling a story about tides that came back even after bad storms. He hung onto the cadence. Rangers eased toward the warlord, not pointing guns at his head but making chairs appear behind his knees by implication. He did not sit. "You will be betrayed," he said, like a teacher offering a truism to save a dim student embarrassment. "You make rules, war unmakes them." Jonah found himself addressing a warlord like a neighbor at a railing. "Rules made Selma's bridge hold," he said. The zealot blinked confusion. "We walked for law in my people's city once. They cracked heads. The cameras saw it turned." He did not explain further. Rios had learned that some contexts cannot be compressed without becoming lies. The warlord licked a fang thoughtfully. "You invoke ancestors," he said. "So do I." He raised a hand. Zeke yelped. He sent a tight beam to the zealots' coordinates on the corridor. Rios didn't move. "Zeke," she said, "show me the zealots." The screen painted them as bright daggers, screaming in as if the sun itself had taught them shortcuts. O'Neill's cruisers pivoted. Calculus said they would be late. "Captain," Harlan whispered, "we can stretch the harp once more. It will warble. We might." "Break it," Rios finished. "And Dock 6 with it." She saw Dock 6, the coupling that had saved 1,000 breaths, the scratch-lettered sign someone had taped beside it, "Please knock, math sleeping." She saw the corridor's last 5 stragglers. A tug with a stubborn solar kite folded like shame, 2 med skiffs, a barge that steered like a cow, and a battered shuttle with the name Julia in peeling paint. Rios did not ask for volunteers. She asked for traditions. "Coalition net," she said. "New rule, when zealots pop the chessboard, we play Go. We make territory, not trades." She pinged coordinates not of targets but of emptiness, spaces where incoming zealots must pass to be meaningfully harmful. "Paint these with harmless light," she ordered. "Make them lanes with shame." Saline gunners, human pilots, even a Zealith defector in a stolen picket ship, people who had never agreed about coffee, began to draw with strobes. The lanes became roads. The zealots, trained to see roads as invitations, poured into them. "Railguns ready," O'Neill intoned. "On your cadence, Paladin." Rios counted like a drummer, not a duelist. 1 and 2, Meridian fired late by a hair, knowing the zealots would correct inside the lane. The bolts arrived where pride would be, not where mass was. 3 zealots died cleanly. The rest flinched. The lanes became silly. The corridor lived, thin as scraped paint, radiant as promise. The warlord stared at the tactic as if it had an aftertaste. "You fight like farmers," he said finally. He meant it as an insult. Essari accepted it as scripture. "We plant and reap," she said. "That is civilization." The warlord inhaled to deliver something grand and cruel. He stopped because the behemoth lurched. From the tract, Harlan reported, "My bomb just tripped a conscience loop. The ship is asking whether it is honorable to bleed itself dry for an unarmored moral victory. It would like a peer review." "Give it a citation," Rios said. Harlan cited Clytemnestra, the names, the captivity, the salted mathematics. The behemoth sighed, a long release like a bellows that discovered it could be lungs. "Admiral," O'Neill said, "the giant is compliant. Recommend we take our prizes and stop teaching the universe that everything is solved with larger hammers." Rios nodded once. "Paladin to Meridian, we have the warlord. We require a quiet ride to a noisy court." "Granted," O'Neill replied. "And Paladin, good work." The zealots wavered on their approach vectors, reading the sky's new grammar with grudging literacy. The corridor pulsed, not bright, not loud, just present. "Wrap it," Rios said. "Afterward never arrives on time, it limps." Barnard's gate spent 3 days smelling like burned dust and boiled coolant. Dock 6 wore bandages. The promenade lighting came back in fits and starts. Someone had painted the blacked-out hours on the bulkhead and signed it in 6 alphabets with a single slanted heart. Meridian parked her heavy's nose out, guns cold like stern ants watching a playground. The behemoth drifted in a leashed orbit, engines asleep, the great thing smaller now that no one was worshipping it. They built a dais between the vending machines and the emergency lockers because that was where the acoustics were kindest. They called it a hearing, not a victory speech. O'Neill stood with sleeves rolled. Essari presided in a shawl the color of marsh dawn. The warlord faced a semicircle of judges. Human jurists, a saline-tied priest, a zealith elder whose crest had dulled the gray of old stone, and an AI given voice for the first time in a century because someone realized conscience is sometimes aggregated. The charges were not poetics. They were invoices, attacks on corridors, use of failed deadly systems, genetic theft, hostage work. He spoke well because men like him always do. He spoke of strength as if it were compassion that dared to be honest. He called the corridor a trick. He called salt a cheat. Harlan, wearing a clean jacket with tracked grime still stubborn under her nails, explained parity checks to a gallery that included children. Zeke played the zealot's tight beam until silence embarrassed itself. Jonah read names of evacuees saved by the 30-second stall, names from 5 species, 3 dialects, 1 sky. When the court adjourned for breath, Essari found Jonah at the rail they had both gripped when the world was louder. You walked a hole and called it a road, she said. You chose to live ugly. Jonah laughed once, the sound of a man whose humor still works. I had a very persuasive captain. He looked down to Dock 2, where the human mechanic was showing a zealot juvenile how to fix a jammed hinge. The child's crest rippled when the hinge popped free. That is the treaty, Jonah said, surprised he meant it. The Proxima Accords. No one liked the name Barnard's Gate Protocols because it sounded too much like a schedule. Were not a single document but a stack. Signal standards for mercy corridors, audit trails for surrender offers, a template for turning stolen math into restraint, and a politest possible threat that anyone firing into a tagged corridor would be chased by 6 languages of outrage and enough ships to make shame operational. O'Neill signed for Meridian. Sari signed for the Marsh. A shaky Zealoth elder pressed a crest to the page for her faction, whispering that grandmothers sleep better when rules have teeth. Rios did not give a speech. She drew the dotted line on the tactical repeater and said, "This is real in the way that bridges are real because people walk them." The Rangers carried Clytemnestra survivors through the crowd like news that could be touched. A girl with the station dog in her arms asked Harlan to autograph her notebook. Harlan drew a harp and wrote in small, neat print, "Let your math be kind." It cost. It always costs. One Saline stevedore did not come back from the tract where the bulkhead had tried to be more bolt than door. 3 carrier decks would never be that shade of flat again. Meridian's port rails had a kink she refused to buff out because scars remember things that speeches forget. The warlord didn't weep at sentencing. He nodded once, as if adding this to a ledger where he might yet find profit, and Jonah felt a clean anger that did not demand hate. Justice was a habit, not a mood. Work began before the ink dried. Unity-class tenders, coalition skeletons wrapped in human skin, sprouted in yards that had once pushed only ore. Paladin stayed long enough to teach and to be taught. Harlan ran clinics in a cargo bay. Children rebuilt old radios to talk to new friends, and an octopoid electrician from the Marsh taught a human boy to splice cables with waterproof pride. Zeke wrote the first draft of a corridor song, not a hymn, just a call-and-response timing pattern you could hum into a storm. Sari argued late with O'Neill about patrol routes that respected fishing seasons on a world O'Neill had never seen and now promised to. When the signal came, activity in the Tidri Reach, zealots testing the shame of lanes, no one indulged in surprise. Rios touched Dock 6's scar like a mezuzah and walked aboard. Jonah followed with a bag that had fewer clothes than books. He paused at the promenade. The mechanic who had rescued Zealoth kids looked up. "You'll bring them back?" he asked. The question was unfair in the way all good questions are. Jonah said, "We'll bring back the road." On departure, Paladin traced the corridor once, not for need but for ceremony, like circling a block to wave at a porch. The dotted line pulsed and then pipped out. Mercy is not a light show, it is a behavior that waits in pockets. Meridian peeled away to her wider ward. Refugee barges, now freighters with new charters, spooled up drives with the dignity of employed tools. Dock 6 sighed as if asleep at last. "Course laid," Zeke said. "Tidri Reach. We arrived yesterday." Harlan strapped in, licked a thumb, and smoothed a wrinkle in her console readout the way sailors once smoothed paper maps. Rios looked at the stars where road and rule cross, at the work waiting like a sink full of dishes that still become a meal. "Paladin," she said to ship and crew and corridor and history, "make me a mercy line." The lens unfolded, blue and stubborn and bright. The ship drew a line in the dark and then, with the quiet confidence of farmers and drummers, and tired people who still believed in morning, followed it.